I don't like that thing, though. You know how they had us, like, it looks like we're side by side. We're not nowhere near each other, and I couldn't see anybody. So I'm like, who the hell is laughing at me?
At 40 years old, Nate Diaz is no longer the defiant kid from Stockton who shocked the fight world. He's a symbol of endurance, rebellion, and the brutal cost of staying real in a sport that devours its own. Once fueled by chaos and cult fame, Diaz now faces a different opponent, time. The wars inside the cage, the controversies, the loyalty to his roots. Each has carved a story into his legacy. Join us in this video as we reveal the tragic evolution of a fighter who refused to change and the price he is paying now. The goodbye that wasn't. In September 2022, Nate Diaz walked into the UFC octagon for what many believed would be his final fight. Across from him stood Tony Ferguson, another veteran worn down by years of brutal wars. It felt poetic. Two fighters who had given everything to the sport, meeting at the edge of their careers. That night was supposed to belong to Nate, and for a moment it did. In the fourth round, he locked in a guillotine choke and forced Ferguson to tap. He didn't scream. He didn't over-celebrate. He simply walked out with his head high. A rare sight in combat sports, a legend leaving on a win. But instead of a farewell tour or a retirement speech, there was silence. Nate refused to re-sign with the Ultimate Fighting Championship. He didn't announce retirement. He didn't reveal a master plan. He just stepped away. No belt around his waist, no final press conference, just gone. The same man who once openly challenged Dana White and criticized the system had now removed himself from it completely. Fans didn't celebrate. They worried. Months later, the quiet ended with surprising news. Nate would return, not to MMA, but to boxing. His opponent? Jake Paul, the YouTube star turned prize fighter. Some people called it smart business. Others said it was a mistake. Either way, curiosity won. In August 2023, Nate stepped into the ring. He didn't get knocked out, but the fight wasn't close. He looked slower than before. His punches came, but not in waves. The gas tank that once drowned opponents seemed smaller. The version of Nate who overwhelmed fighters with endless pressure wasn't there. For the first time, he looked his age. Critics were loud. They said he was finished. Then, in July 2024, Nate surprised everyone again. He returned to face Jorge Masvidal in a long-awaited grudge match. Years earlier, Masvidal had cut him open under bright UFC lights. This time, it was personal history settling a score. Nate threw over 700 punches across 10 hard rounds. He pushed forward. He showed flashes of that old Stockton fire. When the decision was announced, it was a majority win for Diaz. Close, messy, but his. Still, something felt different. He wasn't fighting contenders. He wasn't chasing gold. He was battling memories. Ghosts of an era when he stood at the center of the fight world. The victory didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like survival. Then came the lawsuits. Nate filed a case against the boxing promotion Fan Mio, claiming he was owed $10 million from the Masvidal fight and had received only a fraction. Payments, he said, came slowly and far below what was promised. For a man who walked away from the UFC to control his own future, this cut deep. Independence was the goal. Freedom was the mission. Now he was stuck in courtrooms instead of training camps. Reports suggested chaos behind the scenes, poor promotion, disorganized travel, and delayed payments. His team grew frustrated. The headlines shifted from victories to legal battles. It wasn't just about money. It was about respect. Nate has always lived by loyalty and principle. Feeling used or misled hits harder for him than any punch ever could. As 2025 arrived, the picture became unclear. No contract, no scheduled fight, no championship path, just silence again. And fans were left asking the same uneasy question. How did the most beloved rebel of his generation end up here without direction, without momentum, and still fighting battles outside the ring? Let's find out what happened next. Fading into silence. Behind the legal papers and quiet headlines, something even more troubling began to show. Nate Diaz wasn't training publicly. He wasn't posting updates. He wasn't giving interviews. The same rebel who once stormed press conferences and cursed at reporters had gone completely silent. For a man who built his identity on always showing up, always speaking out, the absence felt wrong. Nate had never been the type to sit quietly. Yet now, he was nowhere to be found. The fighters he once stood beside were moving on. Nate Diaz had mostly stepped away. Jorge Masvidal was entering a different chapter. The Anthony Pettis era was fading too. But Nate wasn't reinventing himself. He wasn't retiring with closure. He was stuck in limbo. Some fans tried to stay hopeful. Maybe he was planning something big. Maybe he was waiting for the right offer. Maybe the fire still burned. But as months passed, belief turned into doubt. His few public appearances told a quiet story. He looked tired, older. The scars that once made him look fearless now made him look worn down. There was no spark in his eyes, just distance. Instead of momentum, Nate entered a quiet collapse. No loud call-outs, no training footage, no fight announcements, just silence from the loudest voice the sport once had. And the sport didn't wait. The MMA world moves fast. While Nate sat on the sidelines, frustrated and tangled in lawsuits, the Ultimate Fighting Championship kept building its future. New contenders rose, new champions borrowed his style of trash talk, but without his raw honesty. The company leaned into polished stars, influencer crossovers, and business-driven branding. For old-school fans who loved grit and realness, something felt missing. But the hard truth was simple. The machine didn't need Nate anymore, not in the eyes of promoters. The man who once headlined massive pay-per-views, who shocked the world by submitting Conor McGregor, was now labeled difficult, a liability. Nate never wanted to play the game. He wanted to fight when he wanted, speak how he wanted, live on his terms. In a sport now fueled by sponsors and social media numbers, that kind of independence made executives uncomfortable. No official statement was ever made, but the signs were clear. His name slowly stopped coming up during broadcasts. He wasn't cage-aside at big events. Even his legendary first war with McGregor felt buried under newer highlights and younger stars. A new generation of fans, raised on TikTok clips, barely understood who he was. Some confused him with other fighters. They watched short highlight reels without knowing the story behind them. They didn't know what Nate Diaz meant to the soul of the fight game. Meanwhile, others adapted. Dustin Poirier stayed active in big fights and the media. Justin Gaethje kept delivering wars. Even McGregor remained in the headlines, building businesses and coaching shows. They stayed visible. They stayed relevant. Nate disappeared back into Stockton. Sometimes he was spotted at a local event. Sometimes he showed up in a grainy Instagram clip. But he wasn't leading conversations. He wasn't shaping narratives. He wasn't demanding attention. He wasn't just absent. He was being forgotten. And that might have hurt the most. Nate had always been more than wins and losses. He stood for loyalty, for brotherhood, for refusing to bow down. But symbols only last if they remain in the light. Whether from exhaustion, bitterness, or simple stubborn pride, he stepped into the shadows. Fans kept asking the same questions. Why won't he return? Why won't he speak? Does he even care anymore? By 2025, the silence felt heavier than any defeat. In MMA, legends can be replaced overnight. If you disappear for too long, history moves on without you. Then came whispers. Nate was training again, watching fights closely, maybe even talking to Dana White. Was it real? Was a comeback brewing? Keep watching to find out. A comeback built on conditions. For a brief moment in early 2025, hope rushed back into the fan base. A headline began to circulate. Nate Diaz wants to return, but only for gold. It sounded like the old Nate, not chasing a quick payday and chasing respect. He called out Max Holloway for the BMF belt. He teased a trilogy with Conor McGregor. He even floated the idea of stepping into the boxing ring with Canelo Alvarez or Terence Crawford. Massive names, massive stages, but also long shots. Fans were split. Some loved the ambition. Others rolled their eyes. Still, everyone paid attention. When Nate Diaz speaks, the fight world listens. But this time, there was a catch behind every call-out. He wouldn't return unless the opponent was big enough, unless the contract gave him control, unless a title was involved, unless the moment felt worth it. So far, none of those boxes have been checked. The bold words were still there, but something underneath felt different. There was hesitation. For years, Nate never blinked. He fought anyone, anywhere, anytime. Now, the armor showed cracks. The months kept passing. The clock kept ticking. He wasn't in his prime anymore, and he knew it. He once built his brand on saying, I'm not surprised, but now he looked surprised at how quickly time had moved without him. In interviews, people close to him say he's changed. He talks less, trains less, trusts less. The lawsuit battles drained him. The spotlight that once fueled him no longer excites him the same way. The fire might still flicker in his eyes, but the body doesn't always respond. For the first time in his life, Nate Diaz doesn't know what comes next. He's not the hungry young lion anymore. He's not a defending champion either. He's something harder to define. A legend in limbo. Still respected, still dangerous, still loved, but stuck. And in the fight game, being stuck is the most dangerous place of all. As 2025 rolls on, the silence around him feels heavier. Not just the lack of fights, but the lack of voice. This is a man who once turned every press conference into a war zone. He didn't just fight opponents, he fought the system. Loudly, publicly, fearlessly. Now, there's nothing. No podcasts, no gym tours, no loud defense of his legacy. Just distance. When most fighters fade, there's a pattern. They start coaching young prospects. They appear in corners on fight night. They become analysts. They open schools and pass down knowledge. They stay visible in some way. They leave fingerprints on the next generation. Nate hasn't done that. Even in Stockton, where his name once echoed like a battle cry, sightings have been rare. The gym that Nick Diaz helped make famous is still active. Fighters still walk through those doors. But Nate isn't the one leading the room. But where did it all start from? How did Nate Diaz come to be so recognized? Stay tuned to find out. Built in Stockton, the making of a fighter. Long before the silence, the lawsuits, and the questions about his future, Nate Diaz was just a kid from Stockton trying to survive. Born to Melissa and Robert Diaz, he grew up with Mexican and Anglo roots, raised alongside his brother Nick Diaz and their sister Nina. Life wasn't glamorous. It was rough around the edges. Stockton and nearby Lodi, where he attended Tokai High School, shaped him early. There were no silver spoons, just grit. At 11 years old, Nate followed Nick into martial arts. It wasn't about fame, it was about toughness. About learning how to fight in a world that didn't hand out many favors. By 17, he had already stepped into a bare-knuckle MMA bout against Robert Lyman in 2002. Grainy footage later surfaced, showing a skinny teenager already willing to bleed. That was his first taste of combat. It wouldn't be his last. When he officially turned pro, Diaz fought mainly under the World Extreme Cage Fighting banner. In 2006, at WEC 24, he challenged Hermes França for the lightweight title, but lost by submission in the second round. Soon after, WEC was absorbed by the Ultimate Fighting Championship, and Nate's path shifted. His real breakout came on The Ultimate Fighter Season 5. Fighting on Team Jens Pulver, Nate tore through the bracket. He submitted Rob Emerson, then Corey Hill, with a tight triangle choke. In the semifinals, he beat Gray Maynard. In the finals, he faced teammate Manuel Gamburian. When Gamburian dislocated his shoulder attempting a takedown, Nate capitalized and won by submission, claiming the TUF crown. The skinny kid from Stockton had arrived. From there, the bonuses stacked up. Submissions, Fight of the Night awards, gritty wars. He flexed mid-submission against Kurt Pellegrino, flipping double middle fingers before securing the choke. That moment captured who he was. Fearless, disrespectful, unfiltered. There were setbacks, too. Losses to Clay Guida, Joe Stevenson, and later to Rory McDonald tested him. Wrestling heavy opponents exposed gaps. Weight cuts drained him. At one point, after multiple losses, Nate admitted the cut to 155 pounds wasn't worth the money and considered staying at welterweight. But quitting wasn't in him. He bounced between divisions, choking out Marcus Davis and submitting Melvin Guillard. Even in losses, he earned Fight of the Night checks. Every time he stumbled, he returned sharper. When he dropped back to lightweight, he submitted Takanori Gomi and then delivered one of the best performances of his career against Donald Cerrone at UFC 141. Despite brutal leg kicks, Nate overwhelmed Cerrone with volume, landing an astonishing 82% of his strikes. That was the blueprint of his rise. Not perfect, not polished, but relentless. The tragedy today feels heavier because of that journey. He wasn't manufactured in a lab. He wasn't built by marketing teams. He was shaped in small gyms, in tough neighborhoods, in wars that paid in scars. And that's why watching him fade now feels personal. The same kid who started fighting at 11 to survive became a symbol of defiance inside the UFC cage. Every bonus check, every submission, every bloody grin built the legend piece by piece, which makes the silence surrounding him today harder to accept. Because when you remember where Nate Diaz came from, the small gyms, the early losses, the long road through WEC and The Ultimate Fighter, you realize he never had an easy chapter. He fought for everything. And now, as his story hangs in uncertainty, fans can't help but wonder if the fighter who survived all of that still has one more battle left in him. Was Stockton's toughness enough for championship gold? Keep watching to find out. Gold dreams, highs, and hard lessons. After years of grinding on the mats, Nate Diaz finally earned his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt from Cesar Gracie. It came just 1 month before a major test against fellow black belt Jim Miller. The timing felt symbolic. Nate wasn't just a scrappy striker anymore. He was certified at the highest level on the ground. When he faced Jim Miller at UFC on Fox 3 in May 2012, he showed it. Nate outboxed Miller early, even dropping him with a straight left. When Miller shot for a takedown late in round 2, Nate stuffed it and smoothly rolled into a guillotine choke. Miller tapped. It was Diaz's 5th submission of the night bonus, and the first time Miller had ever been finished. It felt like Nate was entering his prime. That momentum carried him into a title shot against Benson Henderson at UFC on Fox 5 for the lightweight belt. 3 weeks before the fight, he signed a new 8-fight deal with the Ultimate Fighting Championship. The opportunity was huge. The result was humbling. Henderson controlled the fight, and Nate lost by unanimous decision in a one-sided bout. The dream of gold slipped away. Then came a brutal setback against Josh Thompson in 2013. A head kick dropped Nate, and punches followed. In a rare emotional moment, his brother Nick Diaz threw a towel into the cage trying to protect him. Soon after, Nate was suspended for 90 days and fined for using a slur on social media. The rebellion that made him famous sometimes burned him too. He bounced back later that year with a TKO win over Gray Maynard in their trilogy fight, earning his first knockout of the night bonus. But inactivity soon followed, and by 2014, he was removed from the lightweight rankings. When he returned against Rafael dos Anjos, he missed weight and looked flat, losing a lopsided decision. Another long layoff followed. Then, in December 2015, he fought Michael Johnson and won a clear decision. Afterward, he delivered a fiery post-fight call-out aimed at Conor McGregor. The moment went viral. 11 days later, he stepped in on short notice at UFC 196 to face McGregor at welterweight. Few believed in him. Nate shocked the world, submitting McGregor in the second round. It was one of the biggest upsets in UFC history. The rematch at UFC 202 was razor close, but Nate lost a majority decision in another fight of the night war. He later returned to defeat Anthony Pettis in 2019, then headlined UFC 244 against Jorge Masvidal for the symbolic BMF belt. A doctor's stoppage ended that fight due to a deep cut. In 2021, he faced Leon Edwards in a rare 5-round non-title bout. Though he lost the decision, he nearly finished Edwards in the final minute, reminding everyone of his danger. Through belts won and lost, suspensions, wars, and comebacks, Nate's career was never smooth. It was wild, emotional, and real. And every high moment only makes his uncertain present feel heavier. But what happened when the fighting left the cage? Let's find out. Outside the cage, loyalty, chaos, and consequences. Away from the spotlight, Nate Diaz has always been tied closely to family. His older brother, Nick Diaz, isn't just blood. He's his lifelong teammate. Together, the Diaz brothers built their reputation on toughness, loyalty, and doing things their own way. They became outspoken advocates for cannabis long before it was widely accepted in sports. Over the years, they launched a licensed line of marijuana products with California Finest and later started their own CBD brand, Game Up Nutrition. They also run the Nick Diaz Academy in Stockton, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu school rooted in the same gritty values they grew up with. For Nate, Stockton has never just been a hometown. It's identity. It's pride. Since he was 18, Nate has followed a mostly vegan lifestyle, though he admits to eating fish occasionally. Discipline in diet was always part of his edge. In June 2018, another chapter of his life began when he welcomed a daughter with his girlfriend. Fatherhood added a quieter dimension to a man known for chaos. In August 2022, Nate publicly backed former UFC veteran BJ Penn in his run for governor of Hawaii. It was another example of Nate standing with fighters he respected, even outside competition. A month later, in September 2022, Nate announced the launch of his own promotion, Real Fight Incorporated. It was a move toward independence, a way to control the narrative after years under the UFC banner. In October 2022, Nate was involved in a backstage brawl at the boxing event headlined by Jake Paul and Anderson Silva. He was removed from the arena. Months later, in April 2023, footage surfaced of Nate choking a man unconscious during a street altercation in New Orleans. He later turned himself in and faced a second-degree battery charge. His attorney claimed self-defense, and by September 2023, prosecutors declined to pursue the case, citing video evidence and witness accounts supporting that claim. Still, the headlines added weight. In August 2024, another alleged incident occurred at Omnia nightclub at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, where Nate was accused of pushing a security guard. A misdemeanor battery charge followed. If convicted, he could face up to 6 months in jail and a fine. These moments paint a complicated picture. Nate Diaz has always lived raw and unfiltered. That same edge that made him beloved inside the cage sometimes creates chaos outside it. Loyalty, pride, and stubbornness don't switch off when the fight ends. And now, as his fighting future hangs in question, these incidents add to the sense of instability around him. The warrior spirit is still there. The defiance hasn't faded, but the line between rebellion and self-destruction has grown thinner with time. When the chaos faded, what was left behind? Let's find out. A legacy rewritten in silence. For fans who grew up watching Nate Diaz bleed for the crowd, this part hurts the most. It isn't just silence from the sport. It feels like silence from him. His legacy is being reshaped in real time, and he isn't even in the room to defend it. Online debates question his place in history. Some call him overrated. Others laugh at his boxing detour. The hardest part? He never pushes back. He doesn't correct the story. Slowly, his name slips off GOAT lists. Younger fans barely recognize it. His prime years, once electric cultural moments, are reduced to trivia answers. And Nate lets it happen. Not because he doesn't care. Maybe because he cares too much. Maybe losing control over his career, his body, and his business battles made him build walls. It's easier to vanish than to be mocked. Easier to stay quiet than to explain yourself. But silence, when it stretches too long, begins to rot. His once loyal fan base started turning confusion into frustration. Why won't he speak? Why won't he fight? Why won't he mentor the next wave? Fighters like Paddy Pimblett, Sean O'Malley, and Ilia Topuria carry pieces of that rebellious edge, but none carry his depth. None carries the scars the same way. The sport needed his rawness, but he wasn't there. And that absence felt bigger than just one fighter missing. Nate was a mirror for every working-class kid with something to prove. Every underdog who believed heart could beat hype, now that the mirror feels cracked. In its place is an empty room and one question that keeps echoing. Where is Nate Diaz? As months dragged on, whispers shifted from career talk to health concerns. His body wasn't what it used to be. Not just normal aging. Years of war are catching up. Years of 5-round battles, weight cuts, and damage absorbed without ever stepping back. The body that once defied logic now seemed to be asking for rest. People close to him noticed it first. His movements, once loose and unpredictable, looked stiff. Fans who spotted him in airports quietly filmed him walking slowly, sometimes limping, sometimes holding his side. The same man who once flipped off opponents with a bloody face now moved carefully, like someone trying not to make things worse. The armor was cracking. Insiders whispered about bad knees, about cardio not being what it once was, about concussions from years of punishment. Some said it was hard just getting him to commit to daily training anymore. His face looked older than 40, not just aged, but weathered, worn by life and war. Other fighters have turned pain into a second act. Coaching, advocacy, business, reinvention. Nate didn't. He didn't open a gym franchise. He didn't launch a public recovery journey. He didn't speak about mental health or long-term damage. He just disappeared. And that made every rare sighting more alarming. When he appeared at an event in 2024 looking uncomfortable, social media reacted fast. That doesn't look like him. Is he okay? But no explanation followed. No reassurance, no plan. Because Nate Diaz never wanted pity. He wanted to be remembered as the Stockton soldier, the fighter who never backed down, the man who laughed at head kicks and taunted through blood. But reality doesn't care about reputation. The sport had taken pieces of him slowly, quietly. No ceremony, no protection, no long-term safety net. Now the man who once ran marathons inside the cage struggled just to jog without pain. And that is the tragedy fans never prepared for. Not the loss to Conor McGregor, not the lawsuit drama. This, watching a man give everything to a sport and receive silence in return. No health coverage headlines, no grand support, just a battered body in a quiet house, wondering where the noise went. Now, in 2026, Nate Diaz stands on the edge of something that feels irreversible. His legend still lingers. His name still sparks conversation, but not like before. Each new Ultimate Fighting Championship card announcement makes his absence louder. Fans are tired of guessing. Promoters are tired of waiting. The machine has moved on. And yet, somehow, there's still a chance. Because legends don't fully disappear. They either fade or they rise one last time. Can silence turn into one final shot? Keep watching to find out. One last shot at gold? At 40 years old, Nate Diaz hasn't stepped inside the Ultimate Fighting Championship octagon since submitting Tony Ferguson in 2022. That night felt like an ending. But to Nate, it apparently wasn't. Since then, he's said more than once that he wants one final run before laying the gloves down for good. After back-to-back boxing matches with Jake Paul and Jorge Masvidal, Diaz revealed last year that his goal wasn't just to fight again, it was to challenge for a UFC title one last time. Not a farewell tour, not a tune-up bout, a title. Now talk of his return has grown louder as the UFC prepares for a historic event, UFC White House, scheduled for June 14th to celebrate 250 years of the United States, falling on President Donald Trump's birthday. The card is expected to be massive, filled with star power. Big names like Conor McGregor and Jon Jones are already circling it. And Nate? He seems to be circling it too. This week, his social media lit up with a familiar tone. Confident, defiant, a little confrontational. He reminded fans that he helped create the BMF spotlight back in 2019 when he faced Masvidal for the symbolic belt. In his words, he brought value to a whole division and gave others the platform to shine. "I got unfinished business," he wrote. "I plan on going and taking what's mine." It sounded like the old Nate, the man who believed the spotlight belonged to him, the fighter who never waited for permission. But here's the question hanging in the air. Is this a real comeback brewing, or just another flash of fire in a long stretch of uncertainty? He says he's coming. He says he started something special. He says he's ready to take what's his. At 40, with miles on his body and time not on his side, the window is small. But if there's one thing Nate Diaz has always done, it's move on his own terms. And if the White House card becomes reality, don't be surprised if the Stockton veteran tries to turn one last headline into one last war. So, what do you really think lies ahead for Nate Diaz? Let us know in the comments section below. The tragic lifestyle of Nate Diaz, now at 40 years old, reveals how glory, pride, and silence collided. What once looked unbreakable, his toughness, his rebellion, his legend, now shows the human cost of war inside and outside the cage. If this changed how you see Nate Diaz, like Subscribe, turn on notifications, and watch the next story.